America. Everyone, please help me welcome to the stage your bishop, Robert Barron.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. That was, thank you, a nice introduction. Look, it does my shepherd's heart proud to see this crowd here. What a marvelous gathering. I've been to a lot of these things over the years. In fact, when I was rector of Mundelein Seminary in Chicago, I used to run events like this. We never got more than about 400 or 500 people. So 850 for the Mankato Newman Center. Pretty good. Pretty good. So my first word is thank you to all you good people that support this marvelous ministry. And how about those testimonies? That's why we're doing it. I mean, congratulations to our two speakers. We lifted up my heart just to hear you talk about it. And then, Father Brian, I got to get one of those scooters. That was something. I could make my way around this whole diocese on that scooter. You know, whenever I have the opportunity to speak after dinner, I'm always reminded of an event from many years ago when I was still in Chicago. And it was a gathering, it was a room like this, probably as many people, because it was all the Chicago priests for our convocation, 800 or so. And we had cocktail hour and then big dinner with roast beef and wine and the whole bit. And about 8 o'clock, the keynote speaker came out, and he was Cardinal Martini, who at the time was the Archbishop of Milan. And Cardinal Martini had come all the way from Italy to address the priests of Chicago. And he was given the title, Joy and Hope. You give us a source of joy and hope. Well, he took it to mean to talk about Gaudium et Spes, the Vatican II document. And Cardinal Martini was a very serious academic with a heavy accent. And he had pages, like 25 pages of text. And he began to read in this laborious way, right? Well, I say within 10 minutes, half the Chicago Presbyterate was yawning and snoring and so on. So he finally came to the end of the talk, and the MC got up, who was kind of a wag, and he said, well, that was a dry martini. So I always think of that. I will try not to be too dry a martini. I promise to Father Brian I'll get through the talks. You want everyone out by 7:30, which I agree with. For these big fundraisers, you want people a chance. They know it's going to end at a certain time. So I promise I won't go on. Let me say this, everybody. Why are Newman centers of such significance, including the one in Mankato? I would say because of the culture of self-invention, which is the air that almost every young person breathes in our society. What do I mean? I mean this culture that says, you decide who you are, you decide what your life means, you decide value, it's all up to you. We so valorize freedom that it's all up to individual choice. Can I suggest to you, everybody, that's spiritual poison. That's a recipe for what indeed we see among a lot of young people today, spiking numbers in depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. When it's all about me and my choice, I'm locked in my own little world. What makes life worth living is not when I just get as free as I can possibly be. No, it's when I'm introduced into this world of value. I mean the values of the mind, truths that beguile the mind. I mean goods that allure the will. I mean splendid things, beautiful things that awaken the heart. It's when things outside of us, great objective values call to us, that's when we come alive. Let me read you something. It's, I think, along with the Dred Scott decision and Roe v. Wade, the dumbest and most morally problematic thing the U.S. Supreme Court's ever said. It was in the matter of Casey versus Planned Parenthood, 1992, so 33 years ago. And here's part of the resolution of the U.S. Supreme Court. At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own meaning of existence, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Now, I'm sure they thought they were affirming human freedom or something. But that's spiritually deadly language. Again, at the heart of liberty is the right to define my own meaning of existence and the meaning of the universe. You know what that means, everybody? I got my sense of the universe. You got your sense. You got your sense. You have yours. You have yours. You have yours. And there's nothing that draws us together. Nothing that lures us together toward a common good. There's no actual framework of meaning. One reason why we can't have discussions in public anymore, one reason why there's so much rancor and vitriol and violence even, is a common frame of reference has been lost. A kind of moral vacuum, a kind of intellectual vacuum in which all these freedoms operate. In the great Catholic tradition, that's not what freedom is. In the great Catholic tradition, freedom is the disciplining of desire so as to make the achievement of the good first possible and then effortless. I'm going to say that again, then I'll give you some examples. Authentic freedom is not, I decide everything. It's my choice. No. Authentic freedom is the ordering or disciplining of desire so as to make the achievement of the good first possible, then effortless. Now, examples. Anyone in this room who's ever learned to play a musical instrument, how'd you learn? Oh, I just played any way I wanted. I just decided how I'm going to do it. No. Through great teachers and mentors, through your own study and discipline, the objectivity of the piano or the guitar or the flute got into your mind and into your hands and fingers and into your body so that gradually you were able to play that instrument more freely, right? At the beginning, when you're just barely able to do anything, you don't feel free. You feel like you're in chains. But as you discipline your mind and your body and your fingers, now you're able to play more and more and more and with greater fluency. Learning to play a sport. Everyone in this room at some point we learned to play a sport of some kind. Well, just go out there and do whatever you want. You decide what you're going to do. No. You'll never learn baseball or football or golf. I just played golf with Father Brian a few days ago at Lake Okoboji with all the priests. Hey, just pick up that club and swing any way you want. It's up to you. How's that going to work? No. Through great teachers, and I've had a couple in my life. I'm a lousy golfer, don't get me wrong, but I've had a couple of good teachers who put the moves of the golf swing in my body and in my mind and in my fingers and got my body in the right position and all that. And as I internalized these rules, these objective truths, I became a freer golfer, able to do more and more of what I want to do on the golf course. As you learn a language, I'm up here as at least a relatively free speaker of English. I can say pretty much whatever I want to say. Is that because I just chose to speak any way I want? Well, no, the same thing. I took into myself the rules and the grammar and the syntax of English, and I listened to great English speakers, beginning with my parents when I was a kid, reading English texts. And as I brought all that into me, I became freer, able to speak the language fluently. That's the classically Catholic understanding of freedom. It's not opposed to rules or law. On the contrary, law, as it's internalized, makes you more free. Does that make sense? Think of St. Paul here, right? He said, it's for freedom that Christ has set you free. And he says, I'm the slave of Christ Jesus. Now, on the Casey versus Planned Parenthood understanding of freedom, that makes no sense at all. If you're anybody's slave, you're not free. No, but the freedom I'm describing, it makes perfect sense, is the more Paul internalized Christ. And didn't he say, in fact, it's no longer I who live, it's Christ who lives in me. in the measure that he did that, he became freer and freer. Okay. Now, St. John Henry Newman. It's a Newman Center we're celebrating. Newman's one of my great heroes. When I used to teach a course in Newman at the seminary, this is years ago, I would say, I got two predictions. One is they're going to make him a saint, and then they're going to make him a doctor of the church. I'm 2 for 2 on Newman. Happy about both those moves. Newman had very much this second sense of freedom that I'm talking about. In his great book, The Idea of a University, Newman lamented something. It was happening for the first time in his era, in the mid-19th century, that theology or religion was being excluded from the circle of university disciplines. So universities had, math and science and history and so on and so forth. But increasingly, they were excluding theology or religion from the circle of disciplines. Newman raised his voice in protest to say, no, if you're a real university, of course theology belongs in the circle of disciplines. Indeed, he said, it belongs in the center. Because God has to do with everything else in life. I'll give you an example. Look at the physical sciences. Maybe there's some students or teachers of the physical sciences here. What does every scientist have to assume? He or she has to assume the intelligibility of the world, right? If you're a scientist, you're a biologist, you're a chemist, you're a physicist, you're an astronomer. What's the one thing you have to assume? You have to assume the world that you go out to meet is marked by an order and an intelligibility that corresponds to the seeking mind. If there were no order or intelligibility in the world, no science would get off the ground. There's a great text. It was published in 1960 by a famous physicist called Eugene Wigner. He was a younger contemporary of Einstein. Wigner was a secular Jew, not a religious man, but a very careful physicist. What did he discover? He said, in all my work in physics, as I examine the physical world, I have to use the highest mathematics to describe it. So he wrote the article called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Physical Sciences. It's an interesting title. The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Physical Sciences. He was observing this fact, that there's an objective intelligibility to the world that's so complex that only the highest mathematics can reach it. I say he's not a religious man, but he was so intrigued by this, he asked the question, where does that come from? Why should the world be that way? And he was hinting at the answer, of course, that our great tradition holds. The world that every scientist examines, the world of objective intelligibility, is grounded in and comes from a great divine intelligence that has thought it into being. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. And through that Word, all things came to be. The world is not dumbly there. The world is intelligibly there. Now you see Newman's point. You can't really do science unless your mind is open to theology, the consideration of God. I'll give you one more example. And this one I use with people who are very skeptical of religion. Maybe they're like uber liberal in their political thinking. They tend to say, look, morality is just a matter of subjectivity. It's just a matter of societal consensus. Don't lay all these guilt trips on me. But I'll ask people like that, would you hold that slavery is wrong? Well, yeah, of course I do. Is that just your opinion that it's wrong? No, it's wrong. Is that just a cultural consensus that it's wrong? No, it's wrong. And, even though 175 years ago, a lot of people in our country thought slavery was fine, And who knows, maybe in 200 years, they'll think it's fine again. Would that change your mind? No, no, no. Slavery is wrong. How about discrimination based on race? No, that's a bad thing. That's wrong. What if everyone thought it was? What if there's a new consensus about that, the way there was 200 years ago? Would that change your mind? No, no, no. That's objectively wrong. Where do those truths come from? Where do these moral laws come from? You admit it's not just from your subjective opinion. You admit it's not just from the consensus of society. There's something universal, unchanging about these moral truths. Huh. Yeah, I guess I do. How do you explain that? The answer of our great tradition is the same way you explain objective intelligibility. These laws that we discover in the moral order come from a great eternal law giver. Otherwise, they could be as fluid as anything else. They could be as changing as anything. But you don't hold that. You hold them to be absolute and objective. Yeah, I do. How else to explain that? Except through recourse to a great divine and eternal lawgiver. You see again Newman's point. You can't really talk about ethics unless you're open to talking about God. These great, everybody, objective truths, objective values, objective beauties lead us to God, are conditioned by God. Thomas Aquinas says that all of our political laws are grounded in the moral law, which in turn is grounded in the eternal law of God. You want to see a beautiful modern example of that? Read Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham City Jail when he was trying to explain to his peers why he was doing what he was doing. And he said, I'm opposing these Jim Crow laws, not just because they're bad politically. I'm opposing them because they're bad morally. More to it, they're repugnant to the eternal law of God. Now, I bring all this up, everybody, because our young people especially, who live in this culture of self-invention, who live in the world of Casey versus Planned Parenthood, it's all up to you. You define everything. Our young people are starving for these objective truths, this objective good, this objective beauty, all of which speaks finally of God. Where are they going to hear this unless in places like a Newman Center? They might not hear it in the classrooms. They might not hear it within that secular context. They need a place where their souls can be fed. That's why we support these places. Can I say a little quick word about St. Thomas More, whose statue is right here? So More lived, 3 centuries before Newman. He lives in the 16th century. More was one of the most famous, accomplished people of his day. Writer, statesman, philosopher. One of his best friends was Erasmus of Rotterdam, who was the most intelligent man of his time. More rose politically to the highest office in the land, next to the king. He became the Lord Chancellor of England, a bit like Prime Minister today. More lived in a beautiful estate in Chelsea that's now well within the boundaries of London. In those days, it was outside of the city walls. He had wealth. He had power. He had fame. He had the comforts of life. But in the midst of all of that, Thomas More knew there was a supreme good, which had nothing to do with these worldly attainments. He knew the supreme good of his life was Christ, which disciplined his prayer every day, which is why he made Jesus central to his life. And that's precisely why, when at the crux point, the climax point of his life, More was compelled to let go of all these worldly things. He was able to survive. You know, in the great conflict with Henry VIII, when More stood against the king first tried to cajole him and tried to bribe him and so on. When that didn't work, King took away his Chelsea mansion, took away his office, took away his power, his influence. The whole country turned against him. He took away his wealth. And More ends up, I had a chance to visit it, in this awful cell in the Tower of London with open windows to the cold air and dripping and miserable. And this man, once at the top of his society, ends up in this miserable prison. And then, of course, is sent to his death by decapitation. More's famous last words, you know, on the scaffold, "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." See, More knew that all his life. He knew, even when he had everything in the world, that there was something that mattered more. That was his relationship to Christ. And that kept him alive, kept him focused, kept him spiritually sane when he lost all the goods of the world. Why do we need the Thomas More Newman Center? Because our young people, everybody, hear all the time, every day, in every movie, in every book, in every song, it's in every part of the culture. Get those things, get wealth and get power, get privilege, get honor, and you'll be happy. Who will speak against that lie? And who will speak to them of Christ? Who will speak to them of Christ? That's why we need a Newman Center. And that's why I'm so grateful to everybody here for supporting it. God bless you all.